afternoon. It's 2:31 now, so I guess let's kick things off right on time. Welcome, welcome. This is the NABERS customer webinar for data centers. Before I really begin, I just wanted to say thank you so much for carving time out of your busy schedules to join us. I hope you're able to gain some valuable insights and useful information. Okay, now before we dive right in, I first wanted to acknowledge that today we meet on many Aboriginal lands, and we at NABERS pay respect to the elders of these lands, past, present, and emerging. And I also extend that respect to any Aboriginal person attending the session. Okay, some quick housekeeping for everyone. Your mic has been muted, so kindly remember that in case you have a question later. We're going to have two Q&A slots for this webinar, one halfway and one at the end. But anytime you have a question, please post it in the chat. And if it's easy to answer, someone will answer. Otherwise, we'll save your question for Q&A. And feel free to upvote any questions, and we'll prioritize those during the Q&A times. Okay? And here is our agenda. Very shortly, I'm going to hand you over to Magali. Magali is our head of market development, and she's going to welcome us all. And also in the call, we have Elena, our domestic partnership and policy manager. Elena is going to share recent policy developments that impact data centers. And then we're very, very grateful to have Bob Sharon joining us. Bob is our very special guest speaker, and he's going to talk to us about how data centers can improve their energy efficiency. And after Bob, we'll have a few updates for you, starting with updates about our NABERS Data Center tools. And this is going to be led by Andy, our acting head of product development. And last but not the least, updates to other tools in our NABERS universe. And this update will be provided by Ron, our acting head of market transformation. Okay. I think that's enough talking from me. Over to you, Magali.
Thank you, Carissa. Great to see everybody here this afternoon. It looks like we've got 66 participants and still rising. So thank you so much for making the time to join us today. As Carissa mentioned, my name is Magali Wardle. I'm the head of market development here at NABERS. And basically what our team is interested in is understanding how our customers can get the best benefit from their NABERS ratings. And that can be anything from reporting, policy tie-ins, sustainable finance, all those different benefits. So I thought today I'd spend a little bit of time talking about our annual report. So if we could go to the next slide, please, Carissa. We just released our annual report for last financial year, and that has a wealth of information about NABERS and the buildings that we rate. This year is also the first year we have a full year of renewable energy indicator data, and it's been really interesting to dive into the trends in different sectors. As we're having a data centers webinar today, I thought I'd highlight the dashboard in our annual report, and I also invite you to take a look. Alex will post the link to our annual report so you can access it whenever you'd like. Next slide, please, Carissa. So this first slide that you can see basically shows a couple of statistics about participation in NABERS ratings for data centers over the years. So you can see we started off around 2014, and there's been a general upward trend in ratings being certified over the years. We had a big peak in FY23. It's dropped a little bit for last financial year, but we think that's actually just a timing thing, and we've seen a lot of ratings already come through this year. So we think that the ratings have just spilled over into the next financial year. It's not shown in our annual report because this is looking back at last year, but we're seeing a really big uptick in data center ratings this year. We've already had 11 rated and we're only halfway through the year, not even in fact. The chart on the right shows the number of ratings that are achieving 5 stars or more over that time period. So it's been really great to see how data centers have been improving year on year. And we're now sitting at 3 data centers that are sitting at that 5 stars and above. And for a sector where rating improvements are really quite hard to achieve, those buildings that are maintaining those 5-star ratings since 2022, that's really impressive to see. So if we now move to the next slide, this slide shows how the average rating for data centers has changed over time. And the chart below also shows how the emissions intensity has changed over time. So again, it's really good to see that the average for data centers is sitting around 4.6 stars, and there's definitely been an improvement over the last 10 years, where the average was more like 4 stars 10 years ago. Another really great piece of news is seeing how the greenhouse gas intensity is consistently dropping year on year in data centers. So moving to the next slide, the other thing I just wanted to touch on today is our new strategic plan. So we released our 5-year strategic plan at our conference in June 2024. It runs until 2029, and it's based on 3 main goals. The great thing about these goals is that they will help us to prioritize and make strategic decisions about the program. So if we just click through so we can expand on the different goals, please, Carissa. So the first one is around improving performance. So this goal is about meeting NABERS' ultimate goal, which is to help improve the environmental performance of buildings. And it's something that's been implicit for our program for quite some time, but this is the first time we've made it into an explicit goal. The next goal is grow the market. So for this goal, we actually want to triple the number of NABERS ratings, and that's going to be achieved by driving uptake of existing tools and also looking at expansion into new sectors. So this goal really builds on our last strategic plan and continues that focus on increasing participation in NABERS across all jurisdictions, building types, and rating types. The final goal is called Evolve for Impact. And so while our other goals look at growth and improvement, this goal really looks at ways NABERS can evolve to have more impact. It recognizes that the sustainability area that we work in is incredibly dynamic, and that NABERS as a program and in the way that it operates will actually need to evolve to stay relevant. For instance, when we developed our last 5-year strategic plan, embodied carbon was quite a niche subject. Wasn't that many people talking about it, but things have actually moved very rapidly over the course of 5 years. And we have just yesterday released a national standard for embodied carbon. So this goal is all about giving us the flexibility to respond to up and coming opportunities where NABERS can really make an impact. So if we move to the next slide, I guess, how does that relate to data centers? So thinking about improved performance, we want every building sector to improve. We want more data centers to get up to that 5 stars or more NABERS rating. And later in this webinar today, as Carissa also said, we have a very great special guest speaker, Bob Sharon, who will share some great ways that data centers can improve their sustainability. In terms of growing the market, to increase the number of data center ratings, we've actually got a grant available at the moment for data centers. After 2 rounds, the grant is nearly all taken up, and Annie's going to give a bit more information about the grant and other data center projects we're working on a little bit later today. Finally, in terms of evolution for impact, NABERS ratings are evolving, and one of the things that we do is we ensure that the emissions factors that we use are as current as possible to make sure that the building energy efficiency also keeps pace with decarbonisation of the grid. So later in this session, Ron's actually going to share some updates on emissions factors and the embodied carbon work that we're doing. We're also working with the data center industry to compare different methods of calculating PUE. And I think that's one of the things that Andy's going to touch on a bit later. So I'm now going to pass straight to Elena Eckhart, who's our manager for policy and partnerships in the domestic side of policy and partnerships for NABERS. And she's going to talk to us a bit about some recent policy developments that are really relevant to hopefully everyone in the room. Over to you, Elena.
Thank you, Magali, and hi everyone. I'm Elena. I'm the Domestic Policy and Partnerships Manager here at NABERS, and today I will be sharing a bit of an update on some recent policy developments that impact data centres. Onto the next slide, please. So as the rise in AI and cloud computing are increasingly creating greater demand for data centres, we're seeing that governments are increasingly using their purchasing power to drive greater energy efficiency. And this is really important as it sends out a strong signal to the rest of the market. And we typically see that then private companies follow suit and set their own internal policies. So some of these procurement policies include setting minimum NABERS ratings for data centres. So at the Commonwealth level, this includes the Net Zero in Government Operations Strategy. And at the state level, this includes the New South Wales Government Resource Efficiency Policy. And on the next slide, I'll go into a bit more detail about the work underway at the federal level. So last year, the Australian government updated its data centre panel, and this is available to be used by all Australian government, so including the states and territories. To be included on the panel, the providers need to demonstrate that they are measuring and managing their greenhouse gas emissions and as well meeting the following criteria. That they meet the requirements of the government's ICT sustainability plan for data centres, that they comply with emission thresholds under the NGER Act, that they use accredited green power from renewable sources, that they have a 5-star NABERS rating or equivalent environmental rating, that they're targeting a PUE of less than 1.4, and that they have a roadmap in place to meet net zero emissions, innovation, planning, and investment. So this is a really promising development to see. And on to the next slide. For providers that sit outside of the panel, the federal government has also set its Net Zero in Government Operations Strategy, which was also released last year. And this includes additional metrics to capture data centres out of the panel. And so from the 1st of July in 2025, this sets out that new data centres owned or leased by the Commonwealth are also required to achieve and maintain a rating of 5 stars or equivalent. And for existing data centres that can't be improved to meet that 5-star rating, they're advised to optimise their energy efficiency in setup and operations. And on to the next slide, thank you. So here I've got just a brief update on the recent commercial buildings disclosure expansion consultation. So the consultation on looking to expand the CBD program, so that closed in September. And since then, the CBD team have been very busy compiling all of the responses and working on an updated roadmap. So what I've got on the screen here is the roadmap which was included in the consultation. And our understanding is that this will be updated, reflecting the feedback received. And there'll be, a bit of a process to have the new roadmap approved and sent through all, ministerial channels. So it will still be a little while before I think we have more sort of concrete information on what exactly the changes will be. But in the meantime, the CBD team has provided us with some of the feedback, which specifically relates to the NABERS tool. And firstly, thank you very much to everyone here today who provided that feedback. We understand that a lot of data centre companies provided a lot of feedback, which is really, really useful for us. It means that we can now look to make some improvements to the tool to reflect some of that feedback. So particularly around the PUE metric and also looking to consider water usage. So this is something that Andy will share a bit more of an update on later. And on to the next slide, please. Thank you. So just lastly, I also wanted to let everyone know that NABERS recently released its policy toolkit. And this has been designed to help empower more sustainable choices in procurement, building portfolios and planning. So particularly the section on portfolio management, that might be quite useful for people in the room here today who are responsible for managing multiple data centres and are interested in setting sustainability targets across their whole portfolio. So we've shared a link in the chat if anyone would like to have a read of the policy toolkit, and please let us know if you have any feedback on it. We'd love to hear it. And that's everything from me today. Thank you very much. I'll hand back over to Carissa.
Thanks so much, Elena. All right. So there's lots of policies, and how can you make sure your data center is being energy efficient? And to help us answer that, we have Bob Sharon. Bob Sharon is the founder and CEO of Blue IoT, and Blue IoT offers a cloud-based smart building and campus platform. Bob has over 30 years IT and data center experience, and he is a passionate disruptor who has been recognized by the Australian Computer Society, FMA, Global FM, and others around the globe. So he conducted the very first NABERS Data Centre infrastructure rating way back in 2013, and this taught him everything he needed to know about testing and measuring. And he has big plans to bring new systems across the globe, and this will make big differences in ESG, carbon emissions, health, and well-being. So everyone, please give a warm virtual welcome to Bob. All right. Hi,
There
Bob.
we go. Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction, Carissa, and welcome to all of you. Thank you for joining us today. I hope I'm not going to bore you. We'll try and make it as action-packed as possible. I only have 10 minutes, though we are a few minutes ahead of time, with a 5-minute Q&A. So I'll aim to be much faster than my usual speed. So if we could move on to the next slide, please, as we discuss sustainability in data centers. So I guess I'm going to state the obvious. A wise person once said, you can't manage what you don't know. And hence, it's all about the data. I have no doubt that more and more data center operators are certainly moving down this path and capturing their data, analyzing the data, and then taking the gems out of it in order to see how can we be more efficient. And I think that was reflected in the slide of the improved PUEs that we have seen over the years. However, of course, there are many data centers that are not being rated. So I think moral of the story here, it'll be great to see all of them come on board, and then we'll really get a good understanding of what's happening out there with the whole fleet of data centers out in the marketplace in Australia and, of course, across the globe. So I guess, what are we doing? Are we measuring individual racks? Some are, some aren't. Have we got power? Are we measuring power at the individual racks? Do we know how much power some of these blade servers are chewing up, especially where we're using a lot of AI as we move forward down that path? How accurate are the sub-meters that we are using now, especially at low loads? These are questions we need to ask because we need accurate data. So your outcome is only as good as the data you're getting. If the data is false, well, you know, might have a bit of a problem. So if we could go to the next slide, please, Carissa. Okay, so I guess one of the more obvious things we need to be doing is, what are we monitoring? Are we monitoring the racks or are we monitoring a few points? Now, some systems are more advanced than others, so I'm sure there will be some, but you know, how much are we measuring? It might be that we got problems with some of the servers that might be spitting the dummy, or you know, it could be other issues of in-row cooling or other aspects or problems that will happen that are causing problems. Are we measuring these things? What about dust particulates? Because of course, servers can be quite sensitive to this stuff. So have we got good dust particulate measure? I'm sure, again, many facilities will have this. Is it readily available? And is that in the system? Do people get alerts? What about vibration sensors? Have we got those? You know, particularly on water pumps, compressors, etc. Water leaks. No one ever has a water leak, do they? I wish. Are we measuring for water leaks? So again, the more things we're measuring, then the lower the risk and the higher the outcome we get from a net zero point of view, and a better PUE. And as we get into measuring water for NABERS, again, that will make quite a big difference. If we could go to the next slide, please. So, okay, within your facilities, within the data center facilities, are we running open platform BMS? There are many BMSs today that are closed. So what would happen, for example, ask yourself this question. If a particular vendor said next year, look, we're upping our maintenance by 50%, or you need to upgrade, otherwise it's not going to work. What's going to happen? So they're questions that need to ask, and there are many different, you know, BMS platforms out there. There are some that are much more open, and there are some that are perhaps not so open. So we need to ask ourselves these questions. We don't want to be beholden to a vendor that will lock you in, because there might come a time that it could impact the operation. So going to more open platform systems, and there are a number of those out there, that would certainly make things a lot easier. Are we doing data analytics? And how are we doing the analytics? Maybe you've got your own teams looking at that. Are we collecting enough data? Again, without the data, how much analytics can you do? You can do some, but you're not going to be able to go into the depth and breadth that you need to if you haven't got all the data. It's like having a jigsaw puzzle of the building, but you've only got like a third of the jigsaw puzzle filled and you can't fill in the rest. So we need the full picture. With that, we can do a lot more. Predictive maintenance. Again, have we got good algorithms in our systems that can pick up early warning or problems, so we can determine a simple thing like air pressure differential sensors. So we know, okay, filter is down, we need to replace it in about 3 or 4 weeks' time. That's a more common thing, but there's plenty of other things that we can do in order to, you know, not have a prescriptive maintenance where you might change a filter once a year or once in 6 months, but rather, you know, groups of them when we need to, because in some cases the load might be low. So therefore you might not need to change it. At the time, it could be a lot later. And we get to save on carbon footprint, we get to save on cost, and a whole lot of other things. And then, of course, we've got submetering of power and water. How much submetering have we got? Because the more submetering we have, the more we can break up the bits that we need and see where problems might be occurring. And of course, for NABERS, naturally, we need to have a reasonable level of that as well, so we can more easily provide the data that we need to attain NABERS and other sustainability ratings going forward. And of course, something that is now going to making its way present is generative AI. And that can be implemented quite easily once it's trained. It doesn't come out of the box. Some people think it just comes out of the box. We're at a conference in Asia, and people are asking me, oh, you know, if you've got Gen AI, can we have it? We got to have it. It was like it comes out of a Kellogg's cornflakes packet. Of course, we know it doesn't. But once we can train it and we get onto it, it can be really effective, because if we have an issue, it can come up with some intelligent comments to say, have you checked A, B, or C? We recommend you do this, this, and this, and more and more. This is going to become very cost-effective and quite automated with alerts picked up onto it. So I think there's some good things that will happen out of that. If we could go on to the next slide, please. I think I've got to speed up a little bit. Gee, this thing is a little big. I don't know what happened to this slide. Let's go to the next slide, please. Okay. Okay, going back to that previous slide, I think we missed some of it, but there's a number of one of the big things that's moving forward, of course, is liquid cooling, and moving away from air-based cooling, traditional cooling, and the market is growing, and more it is becoming accepted. A number of data center operators are now starting to adopt this, and we have some of our well-known majors that are doing this. And it's going to happen more and more and more. And it means you can drop PUEs down to below 1.1 when we get this right. So a huge differentiator, and that's one of the areas we can make a massive dip in our PUEs and actually get past get on to 6 stars even. It'll be really exciting to see the first 6-star rated data center. Be pretty amazing. So if we could go on to the next slide, please. And of course, sustainability standards. I'm sure many of you will be very familiar with these that come from all over the globe, and design standards are very important. They're fundamental to any build of a data center or building. It's important. However, what's just as important is the ongoing operational standard. And yes, we have some of these do go on with operational standards, but not in the way that NABERS does. And I've seen a lot of these, and honestly, I don't know why NABERS isn't in every country on the planet. Why? Because it is a simple, it is not complicated rating tool that will look at the previous 12 months of operations and efficiency in a number of areas, whether that's water, energy, waste, a whole lot of other areas. It is absolutely amazing. And so honestly, you can take it to the bank. We know that in buildings, it's proven that the higher the NABERS rating, and particularly when you go from 4 to 5 stars, you got anywhere from 9 to 13% improvement in yield and asset valuation increase based on the Property Institute of Australia. And so we know that you can take these NABERS ratings to the bank, separate to the government requirements, where they're looking for 5-star coming July 1. So it really improves everything from what we can see. If we could go to the next slide, please. Okay, now here is more data on liquid cooling. We can see the market. There's a bit of a disparity. One says the market's 11 billion come 2030. Another one says 21 billion. It's a lot, and it's increasing. So we can see that more and more the market, the researchers are telling us that the market's going to increase. So if we could go to the next slide, please. As I hasten, and I love this, in the beginning when I did the first rating back in 2013, I had to calculate this. And I remember calculating, okay, 4-star, we're on the edge, 1.61 was the benchmark for me at that point. But it's a really handy tool to have a look. And the magic number I can see is 1.07. And I think the way we can get there very much is obviously when we move to more liquid cooling. But 5.5-star, I think we can manage even with the current infrastructure. I think this is quite feasible. If we could go to the next slide, please. And then we have an amazing project or available project on free money. And that is, there's a program under the Energy Upgrade Agreement in Victoria, which provides VEECs, a bit the equivalent of the ESS scheme and ESCIs in New South Wales. But it's linked, and that's linked to the NABERS program. And basically, if we can reduce PUE by, if we say go from 1.4 to 1.35 or 1.5 to 1.45, what that means is we can get approximately on current market rates, which can vary, $375,000 per annum per year. That is for 7 or 8 years, right? And if we increase that and say we, after 2 years, make it go from, say, 1.5 to 1.4, it means we can double it and get 750K. Free money, right? So I challenge any data center operator to go down this path. And that was based, those numbers are based on a 20 megawatt data center. So it's based on those numbers in this example. So I encourage anyone to go down this path. If you haven't got NABERS, get it and then link up to this, and we can provide more information on that. If we could go to the next slide, please. Don't have much time, so I'll endeavour to get this through in the next minute. So basically, what we want to do is go down this NABERS path. I highly recommend it because it will soon be compulsory, certainly for co-location. It's a matter of time. I can't tell you exactly what that time is, but if you wait till it becomes compulsory, then there won't be enough of us to do it, and the rates are going to dramatically increase. I highly recommend get onto it now and do it when you get some free money as well. And even now where the NABERS team are offering further assistance as well. I highly recommend it. And again, can provide more information. If we can go to the next slide, please. Okay, this is just a one-page snapshot. This is the first rating that I did complete, and it was the first rating in history. It was done in 2013. It was Fujitsu Noble Park in Melbourne. And it was really interesting because it was the first one, and I remember asking a gazillion questions. It took me about 300 hours to complete. They had about 50 submeters, and we had a problem because if we had all the data and we had all the meters correct, we were on 4-star. But one of the CTs was buggered, and we're on 3.5-star. And I said, could we, because it was the first one, can we use these algorithms? Can we do this? Of course we couldn't. They're the NABERS rules. Fine. But finally, after a number of months, we found that we had branch circuit monitoring. And we were able to get approval from the NABERS team to use the branch circuit monitoring numbers for that broken CT. That was approved, and we got 4 stars. That was the very first rating in 2013, and then it was published accordingly. And hats off to Fujitsu. They took the initiative. They were first, and it was a great achievement. But without that, and I was a bit like a fighter, you know, in the boxing ring, I wasn't prepared to just sit there and accept 3.5 stars because I knew that they deserved 4-star. But we had to find a legitimate, correct way in order to do that. And again, credit to the NABERS team. We worked together to do that, and we achieved it. So if we could go to the next slide, please. And want to thank you for your time. And I think we're ready for a Q&A session. I think we've got 5 minutes, so please don't hold back. Don't be shy. I love your questions.
Thank you so much, Bob. That was great. Let me stop sharing for a moment so we can all see each other. All right. There was a question in the chat, I think it's for you, Bob. Are data center dust particulates measured as per the ISO 14644-1 Class 8 standard? Wow.
Are they? Well, that's a good question. And I would suggest that many are not. Because it again, for them, for data center operators, it's not so much about air quality, as in, you know, is it okay for me to breathe the air? Rather, it's about protecting servers. It's about protecting data, you know, the equipment in the data hall. That's the number one thing, though we should be worried about air quality in a place like that because people have to work in that. And of course, you've got WHS rules, and I think more and more that does need to be looked at. I'm on a research group with QUT in the area of indoor air quality, and we're looking at setting up new rules and regulations globally for this. So I don't think they are. I could be wrong with some, but I think by and large, they're just being measured to ensure that there's nothing dramatic that's going to affect a server. But that should be looked at more seriously. Any other questions? Please don't be shy. I love questions.
Yes, we have a question from Annie. If liquid cooling makes a large difference, then the ratings will take a step up for those using this technology. Will you distinguish between air and water?
Okay, so look, that doesn't come in to the fray. What I'm trying to say is if you're using a better technology to save energy, that is, you don't need to run chillers, you don't need to run, you might obviously have some just to keep the air cool in the area for staff as normal, but not to cool the racks, which is huge, then that's your benefit and you're saving energy, you're reducing PUE dramatically. So whether you're using chill water or chillers, or you're using in-rack liquid cooling, well, guess what? If you can do in-rack liquid cooling and you save, that's your benefit, and therefore you will get rewarded with a lower PUE. I hope that answers the question. So I would say go for it. And it is being accepted more and more. Please, any other questions?
We have a lot coming in.
Good.
From Chindana, is rack cooling technology in operation here in Australia?
Yes. Yes. Well, we've had back of rack cooling for years, right? So back of rack direct cooling has been around for a long time. In fact, even at Fujitsu, when I did the first one in 2013, they had that. But liquid cooling, yes, is now coming. And again, we have some of the major operators here in Australia are already doing this, not throughout the whole data centers, but parts of their data centers. So yes, it is here in Australia now. Next.
Thank you, Bob. Okay. A naive architect question, maybe like a not so naive. What is done or can be done with the wastewater in a liquid cooling system?
That's a good question. Again, it's only an opinion. I'm not an expert on water. Having said that, though, because typically we need to determine what is a closed loop, because it may be recirculated and it's cooled again. So if it's recirculated, that's great, but eventually it does have to go. So the question then is if we can use it like we're using it for grey water. So, for example, to be used for the lawns outside, for the trees, for example, or for the toilet flushing, for example, that would be great. So there's no reason why for some of that we couldn't, but we need to examine what is the remnant or chemicals that are coming out, if there are any. If there are none, then there's no reason why it can't be used for that purpose. So yeah, good point.
Thank you. Okay, there's a lot more questions coming in, but I think we're ready to move on. Just maybe one more question, and I'm going to give this to Elena. Hi, Elena, if you're there. Do you expect to see updated procurement policies from state governments released soon?
Thanks for the question, Carissa. I think often we would see that after the federal policy, so in this case, the Net Zero and Government Operations policy is released, typically we might expect to see that states might also follow suit. And I think also some states which do have their own whole of government procurement policies often run on sort of 5-year cycles. And I believe that Victoria, New South Wales, and I think also the ACT are sort of approaching the end of their current 5-year plan. So I would say in the next year, we're probably expecting to see some updates state government procurement policies, but we'll have to, I guess, wait a year to see what this includes and how they impact data centres. Because of the panel arrangement, that might mean that data centres might be sort of treated separately to other procurement policies. But it'll be interesting to see what happens next year.
Thank you, Elena. Oh, we have so much questions, but we have to move on to the second half. Don't worry, we'll continue answering them in the chat, or we'll message you. Bottom line is, we're not ignoring you. Let's move on to the second half of our session. Okay. Okay, I'm going to now hand you over to Andy.
Thanks. Thank you for the intro, Carissa. Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you once again for taking the time to join us here today. Carissa mentioned earlier that I'm the current acting head of product development at NABERS. However, I'm also the sector lead responsible for our data center tools and the outreach and stakeholder engagement around them. And I'm here today to give an overview of the work done over the last 12 months that's relevant to NABERS customers, building owners, and decision makers. And I'll also touch on what's coming in the pipeline over the next year. So if you jump onto the next slide, basically, there's 4 items which I wanted to kind of touch on. Firstly, we have the migration of the rating tool to the NABERS Perform online platform. Over the last 4 years, we've been progressively migrating our tools to this new platform. And this year, it was the data center sector's turn. You can see there on the right a couple of screenshots. And from that, you can see it's much cleaner, much clearer. If you've ever seen the old platform, it's terrible, it's clunky. There's better visualizations, the ability to easily upload documents, streamline the approval and certification process. And if there's a previous star rating, there's now the ability to start pre-filling information and do comparisons in real time. Now, development of this UX was done with close consultation with NABERS assessors who do data center ratings. And I wanted to take this opportunity to once again thank them for their contributions to the project. One thing I should note with this migration is that we've only migrated the infrastructure scope ratings to the platform. And this is because nearly all ratings that we've done historically are in this scope. The other 2 scopes which are available are whole building and IT equipment, but we've only done 3, actually, I think it's actually 4 ratings over the last 12 years. And so we're now in the process of determining whether or not these 2 scopes should be retired. And on the next slide, we've got the second item I want to talk about here, which is the updated report. So as part of migrating the rating to the NABERS Perform, the rating certificates and reports have also been updated. Now, the 2 main changes I want to highlight can be seen there on the right. Firstly, up the top, we're now providing a NABERS calculated PUE figure. So this figure uses the same inputs used to determine the NABERS star rating. And what we found talking with assessors is that they were effectively calculating this on behalf of their clients. And so when we migrated over to NABERS Perform, we basically had this built in to streamline the entire process. So now the reports will also spit out that number. Second, we're also added the details for the renewable energy indicator. Now, this is an indicator that shows the percentage of renewable energy consumed by the building in the last 12 months. And we've got a visualization there of a donut chart showing where that energy is sourced. And we also list the actual quantities by their sources. On the next slide, the third item is that we launched the Data Center Starters Grant Program in January this year. So this grant was modeled after the New South Wales Energy and Water Starters Grant. And Data Center Starter applicants who are approved for this grant receive contributions of $8,000 ex-GST towards a data center's first 2 ratings and an energy action plan. Now, unlike energy and water starters, buildings located anywhere in Australia could apply for data center starters. And we've already run 2 rounds, with the last round closing on the 31st of October. And so far, we've had 11 approved applications. We will be running a 3rd and final round in the new year, and I'll provide details of that in the next section. And over onto the last slide about what's happened. We went through recently a process of reviewing and updating of our non-technical marketing collateral. And the result was the release of a suite of data center fact sheets specifically for data center building owners and decision makers. So these new sheets cover various topics, including how ratings can be used to guide operational improvements, how ratings can lead to financial benefits or their use in sustainability reporting, as well as a couple of new fact sheets, one specifically on waste tools that can be used for the data center, for data centers, another one on carbon neutral certification for data centers. Now, these fact sheets can be found on the data centers webpage of the NABERS website, and a link has been posted in the chat. So now looking on to what's coming in the next year in the next slide, The first thing I wanted to highlight is that NABERS is conducting a NABERS calculated PUE study. So we've engaged external consultants to conduct effectively a comparison exercise between NABERS calculated PUE and the most common self-assessed methods. Now, while the formula to calculate PUE is the same regardless of the method used, earlier work that we commissioned found that what energy is or isn't included can vary quite dramatically in the self-assessed methods. And one of the strengths of a NABERS calculated PUE is that it's backed by the NABERS rules around inclusions and exclusions, and therefore is standardized and transparent. So this study explores this in further details. And it's expected to conclude in early 2025 with the goal of publishing a version of the final report soon after. The second thing I wanted to talk about on the next slide is the data center starter grant. So I mentioned earlier, we're looking at doing a third round, and the grant is for $8,000 ex-GST towards the data center's first 2 ratings and an energy action plan. On the right, you can see details for the eligibility criteria for this grant. So essentially, any data center located within Australia and can get an eligible NABERS rating, and that has either never been certified or was last certified more than 6 years ago, can apply for this grant. This final round will open in late January next year, and will continue until roughly mid-May, or until the allocations are exhausted. So this is the final round. So if you're interested, I strongly encourage you to check out the Data Center Starters webpage, and you can find a link to that webpage in the chat now, and get an application in as soon as possible because we really don't have many slots left. Now, the next slide, we've heard from quite a few people now, especially Bob, around water. So we're doing some preliminary investigations around data center water consumption to determine if this is an area we really should be looking at. We developed the data center tool roughly 12 years ago, and at the time we decided not to develop a water tool, which is quite common with all the other sectors. We developed both energy and water at the same time. And the reason for this was at the time due to insufficient data and generally a lack of appetite within the market for it. Since then, we've been hearing more and more concerns about water consumption, and have had stakeholders approach us saying this really is something we should be looking at. So I'm going to use this opportunity to do a very quick survey with everyone here. You should see four quick questions in front of you about water. Now, the answers you give won't be shared publicly, and we're going to use the information provided to help us figure out, well, what are the next steps here. So I'll just pause now for a few moments to let you answer the questions before moving on to the last item. All right, so let's move on to the next one. It looks like we've got more than half the participants already answering. So yeah, the poll will still be open, so please submit your answers. And lastly, looking at waste tools for data centers. So a lot of people assume NABERS waste is only for office buildings, but we have tools that can be applied to other building types, including data centers. Example of this is waste verification. So over the next year, we'll be focusing in on getting that information out there to increase uptake. And this includes things such as a workshop that we'll be hosting early in the new year with assessors and customers about tapping into new markets. We're also developing a strategy to support this uptake that'll align with the 5-year strategic plan that Magali mentioned earlier today. And we'll release further details on this in the new year. So that's some of the things that we're going to be doing over the next 12 months. And as you can see, there's quite a bit. And I've only very focused in on things that say impact customers, building owners, decision makers. There is a lot of other work on the more technical side happening. And look, if there's anything, if you have any questions or you're interested in finding out more about anything I've talked about today, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Happy to have a chat. And now, before I go and hand you over to my colleague Ron for the final presentation today, on the next slide, I just wanted to take a moment to say congratulations to all the data center owners who've gotten their assets NABERS certified over the last 12 months. I want to particularly highlight the organizations you can see on the screen at the moment that have opted to publicly disclose their ratings. There are other companies out there who have done ratings, but they haven't publicly disclosed it. We encourage you to opt in so that we can help promote your good work. Over the last year, we've seen a really, really good mix of assets, either getting their first rated or renewing their ratings. And as Magali highlighted earlier, we're seeing an increase in both higher performing assets, as well as an overall decrease in average greenhouse gas emissions for the data center sector as a whole. Looking at where we're standing with current rating applications and certifications, Magali also mentioned, we're already exceeding both last financial year's numbers as well as our preliminary forecasts. And it really is looking like FY25 will be the biggest year for NABERS data center ratings to date. So yeah, thank you for listening to me. And now I'll pass you over to my colleague, Ron.
Thanks, Andy, and hello, everyone. You'll hear, so first off, I'm Ron Polito. I'm the Acting Head of Market Transformation. You'll hear two pretty important updates from me, and then if we've got time left, we'll still have that second part of Q&A. And the two updates you hear are, one, about the upcoming changes with the emissions factors updates, and two, about the embodied carbon tool that we recently just officially launched yesterday. So first off, the emissions factor update. On this next slide, I'll use this short update to give you a reminder that changes are happening to the NABERS Energy Tool in 2025. And on the next slide, we'll see some information on the webinar. So we'll be running a separate one on the 5th of December to deep dive into what the changes are and how it might impact you. And if you haven't registered already, please do. I'll drop a link in the chat and we'll dive deep into what the changes are and how it might impact you. So you'll hear on what the changes are, on a consultation piece that we're running on the actual changes happening in 2025 and what it should look like. We also want to hear from you on your thoughts on what it should look like. You'll also have a reminder that green power is being phased out of the rating reports, and then updates are happening to the calculations of the renewable energy indicator in the ACT. So on the next slide, I've got a question there, and you're probably asking the same question to yourself. Why does NABERS need to update the emissions factors in the NABERS Energy Tools? To get an answer to that, it would take a bit of time to explain, so I highly, highly recommend that you tune into the webinar on the 5th of December. But I will give you one of the main reasons now, and that main reason is because the electricity grid is transitioning to renewables. So this impacts the emissions factors that are used to calculate the NABERS energy ratings, and then that will have an impact on the NABERS energy ratings if and when those electricity emissions go down to zero. On the next slide, I'll give you a bit of recap on the history. So we had the last change of these emissions factors in the NABERS Energy Tool in 2021. We consulted with industry, with our National Steering Committee, and we agreed to update it every 5 years. So that brings us to the next one being in 2025. And we're hearing from some stakeholders that they want us to move faster. So we're asking the question as part of the implementation, what and when should that next update be? So on the next slide, just another reminder on the webinar, please come along on December 5th for more info. I invite you and encourage you to ask plenty of questions there. I'll be doing the same. I'll be asking you some questions that we want to know in the webinar. And yeah, please feel free to reach out if you wanted to discuss it further. On the next slide, we'll go into the second update, and that is for the embodied carbon tool. So after a lot of work and industry consultation, we launched the tool yesterday at the Energy Efficiency Council's Energy Performance Summit. And on the next slide, you'll see a bit about things about the embodied carbon tool. So if you're not aware of the tool, it provides a certified measure of carbon intensity and enables new buildings to compare their upfront embodied carbon with similar buildings. And we've had the emissions factors on the tool online since June. We ran pilot programs in August with several projects. The rules of the tool are online on the website as well. And if you're interested in the training, there's still time to put an expression of interest forward to attend a session early next year. For data centers, though, sadly, it couldn't be part of the pilot, and that's because we didn't have enough data to benchmark. So on the next and final slide of my update, I ask you a question or ask you a request. We need your help. So we need your help because it would be great to have the embodied carbon tool available for you to use in data centers. But in order for us to do that, we need some help with the data centers to be able to, with the data for the data centers in order to build the benchmark. So we need more information to help us create an accurate and usable tool. So please, please, please get in touch with us if you're keen to share your data and help us shape the embodied carbon tool. That's it for me. I'll pass it back to you, Carissa, and if we've got time, some more questions that are coming through. Thanks.
Thank you, Ron. All right, as promised, we're now in our Q&A, so I'm going to stop sharing. And I think we can all keep our videos on. All righty, so there's no open questions right now, but there were a lot of answered questions. Let me just pick a couple just to see here. Okay. So Vlad had a question to Bob's, which VEET activities would provide such dollar savings? And I think this is a complex program according to Bob, and he started and worked closely with the ACP. Is this right, Bob?
That is correct. It's not something you can go direct and do something. We have a special arrangement with the ACP. No one else has done this yet. It's something we know we can now do. It has been done in the scheme for buildings, but not yet for data centers, but we now are able to do it. So it's complex. So we will do it, and we have an ACP already in line together. We will run the project. So we need to engage and discuss this further if there is some interest.
Great, thank you. We had a question from Jesse, and Jesse was asking, currently in the NABERS Sustainable Finance Framework, data centers has a minimum of 5 stars energy rating to be qualified as low carbon buildings. With the data center tool update, will such a requirement change accordingly? Okay, so unfortunately, we don't have our sustainable finance manager, but just a quick update. If we're not able to answer your questions, we're happy to have a...
Carissa, I can probably answer that question.
Right, because Magali is
right here now. So
thank you, Mags.
Yeah, thanks for asking that question, Jesse. I think the answer is that we do have a regular review of the targets in the sustainable finance criteria, and based on that, if there is a need to adjust those targets, we would accordingly. So we are expecting to release a new version of that criteria within the next few months. But my understanding is that the target for data centers has stayed the same. So hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you. Okay, we're seeing some open questions now. I think, Ron, this is for you. Is NABERS considering a standard on waste heat and waste heat reuse? Or is this for Andy? Yeah.
I can jump in. At the moment, no, there is no plans around waste heat in particular. If you're talking about actual like waste, as I mentioned, the waste verification. But with that said, if this is something that you think should be brought to our attention, get in touch with myself, get in touch with the team, always have a chat. That's how I mentioned earlier, when it comes to say the water side of things, it's gone from nothing to a couple of people approaching us, talking about it, to us doing something about it. So if you believe it's something we should be looking into, please let me know.
Thank you, Andy. And Ron, sorry, I made you turn on your video, so I'm going to hone in on you. A question for you: where does NABERS currently get their emission factors?
Yes, so we currently get our emissions factors. They're published by the Commonwealth Government. They're called the National Greenhouse Accounts Factors. And, very simply, if you actually just went into Google and typed NGA factors, you'll be able to bring up the page on the Commonwealth DQ website that has it there.
Great, that's great. Okay, now we're at 3:30. Unfortunately, I think we don't have time to answer everyone's questions, but this has been great. Thank you so much for your time. I hope that was a good session for everyone. As Ron said, we have a couple of different webinars coming up, so please join us for those. And once again, thank you. Thank you. Have a good rest of the day, and see you when I see you. Bye, everyone.